And then, there's all these various stages. So it might be that I've got one novel where I'm working with the author on the outline, and another one where I'm already reading the manuscript, and another one that is going into layout. And so they're never like all the same thing at the same time. They're, spread out. And so it's not like I'm reading one person's novel and having to read the other person's novel at the same time. That's generally not going to happen. So that helps you keep it all straight. But yeah, it does get a little bit more complicated now that I'm the developmental editor, because I'm working on all these various stages instead of just getting a completed manuscript to copy edit.
Harry, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I'm glad to have you back as a listener, and you get to meet yet another great author on the show. And I'm excited to have Scott here with me. As I'm looking at Scott on my screen, I see a wall of books and everything to do with Star Trek and behind him. And it's a good reason for that, because we'll get into that here as we start the conversation. But if you love Star Trek, then you need to sit down and listen, because you're going to meet somebody who knows a lot about the world of Star Trek. A lot. I'm excited to have him here. Scott, welcome to the show. Nice to have you on Living the Next Chapter.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Scott, before we dive deep into your love of all things Star Trek, where are you in this big world of ours?
I live in a small town called Carlton, Minnesota. It's in the northern half of the state. I live out in the woods. If there was a window behind me, instead of my wall of books, you would just see trees.
Okay.
Because I'm in my detached office from the house, and it's kind of surrounded on a couple of sides just by the woods.
There you go. So the trees would represent the before the book, and the books would represent the after the trees, right? Okay. All right. So you got the thing going on there. Okay, good. Excellent. So your journey as an author, one thing I like to do, Scott, is we have authors listening to the show, and they're coming for inspiration from somebody who's further down the path than they are. As a new starting out author, you are by far further away from the starting point than ever as a writer. So I'm curious if you have any words of inspiration for somebody who's listening on finding their path, writing about the things that they love, anything that could be helpful from a writer's perspective that we could give to a listener as a new writer. What would you like to say to them?
Well, I can try. The world of writing and publishing has changed so much since I started that sometimes I feel like anything I might say is out of date. Because, when I started writing, I was submitting stories via the U.S. Postal Service in a self-addressed stamped envelope to get them back if it got rejected.
Right.
And, and when I got started, self-publishing was a dirty word. Now it isn't. But I think the most important thing is to just keep at it. It can be kind of a cruel mistress to have, the urge to tell stories, because it can be very hard to get published, especially if you're going a traditional route. But you just got to keep at it. And there are so many ways you can end up breaking into things through contests or connections, networks. And so, the most important thing is to keep going. Finish those stories, move on to another one, just keep plugging away.
Can you think back to some of your early writings? What were you writing back in the day, and kind of what inspired you to start at that first?
When I first started writing, I was writing genre stuff, science fiction stuff, because that's the genre that I have loved since I first started reading and watching TV and stuff. Star Trek was very big. I've been a fan of Star Trek since probably the second grade, and for me, that's over 50 years ago. So, lifelong fan. And so when I got started, I was writing very derivative works. As I got more serious about writing and started taking classes and learning that I hadn't known what I was doing when I just, started writing when I was in sixth grade or whatever. Then I started widening out a little bit. And when I took writing classes in college, I knew that the professor wasn't looking for a sci-fi story specifically. And he was looking for more literary, non-genre kind of stuff. And so then for a while I was doing that. And in fact, my first published short story is literary fiction. It's just about an old farming couple in Minnesota, very much inspired by the farm country of northern Minnesota where I grew up. And so for quite a while I was pursuing stuff like that. But then my big break was when I was one of the winners of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds short story contest. And once I got in there, then I really got back to writing more sci-fi stuff. And then that's where I've stayed for the most part ever since.
All right. For readers who are maybe connecting with you for the first time, how many books have you authored at this? New reader to come and fall in love with you. How many are we exposing ourselves to by meeting up with you? This is great.
Well, since I've written primarily short stories is what I've had published, I'm in, I don't know, 15 or 20 anthologies.
Okay.
And most of those are science fiction. But I've written some mystery stories, some horror stories, some just kind of thriller, crime kind of stories here and there. If you search out my self-published work, I now have my latest publication is a self-published collection of short stories called The Sad Rains of Mars, New and Collected Stories. And that has a dozen of my stories that have been published in various anthologies over the years and collects them all together, all basically sci-fi stories. So it doesn't contain any of my like mystery stories or more comedic stuff. Well, that's not true. There's some comedy in there that's infused into science fiction or horror because I like working across a lot of genres.
Okay. All right.
And then, of course, and then I should give a shout out to my Star Trek fiction back in the day where I had a couple of short stories published in the Strange New Worlds contest. And then I had a story in the Star Trek Next Generation 20th Anniversary Anthology. Then I had a novella in the Star Trek Universes, Star Trek Myriad Universes collections. And then I did have a standalone ebook in the Star Trek series. And that was the extent of my Star Trek published fiction to this date.
Now, is that actually with the approval of Star Trek to be writing these stories? Is this kind of like fan fiction is what we're doing?
No, those are all published by Simon and Schuster.
Really?
So those, yeah.
Does Star Trek have any parameters for you as a writer that you have to follow, or are you free to write a story that interests you based in their world?
Back when they were doing the Strange New Worlds short story writing contests, those allowed people to do pretty much what they wanted. But when you're talking about the regular novel line or any of the anthologies that have been published by established writers, those definitely have guidelines. The main guideline is that none of the printed fiction can contradict anything that's been established in the various series and movies.
That takes a level of knowledge and history.
And so, yeah, you have to know the franchise. And that's also why someone like myself then was hired to be the copy editor on the novels, because one of the things that they need to review is making sure that anything that's published doesn't break any of those, things that are established. And obviously most of the people that write Star Trek, they're doing it because they're fans of Star Trek and they know
Yeah.
the franchise.
Right.
But, now 60 years on, there are so many details that have been established. Things fall through the cracks. So it's nice to have various editors working on the manuscripts alongside the authors to make sure that we keep everything straight. And it gets more and more complicated every time there's a new series or a new movie. There's, all that much more canon that's introduced.
Like I can't even begin to fathom how much knowledge and history and insight goes into even being able to identify something that's getting away and straying into brave new worlds, right? Like I don't know how I don't even know how you would do that. That's amazing.
Well, you rely on your memory
Yeah.
a lot, but you also rely on sources, and the primary sources or secondary sources. You start with, there's a lot of Wikipedia based things online that catalog Star Trek details, and you can start with those, but I always go to primary sources. For instance, well, this morning I was working on a manuscript for a Star Trek Adventures role-playing game supplement that's coming out. I don't know when. I won't say the title because I don't know if it's been announced.
Yeah.
But the format in the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game books is they open up chapters with a quote that's from a character in the series or the movies. And I always, as part of my editorial review, I always double check the quote. Now, there are lots of sites that will publish transcripts or quotes from Star Trek, but I always go to the episode, find the scene, and watch
Verify
it
it.
and check word for word
Wow.
to make sure that it's correct. And so most of my Star Trek viewing these days, I rarely have time to watch a whole episode. I'll just be watching a 30-second scene or a little clip here and there to double check little points of detail to make sure everything is right.
So, okay, for somebody who has to be that detailed around what you know about Star Trek, does it actually become more of a job and less of a fan experience for you? Or are you still in love with the franchise as it sits as a fan as well?
It's both.
Okay.
I love Star Trek. I always will. My relationship with it changed as soon as I became published and started establishing both a professional relationship with the franchise in addition to being a fan. But it doesn't take away my enjoyment at all as a fan. I still love reading Star Trek, watching Star Trek. In fact, it can be a challenge because if I'm editing one of the novels, for example, or proofreading one of the comic books, I have to make sure that the fan inside me doesn't get too carried away with the story,
Right.
that I forget that, no, I'm not just reading this, I'm copy editing it or I'm proofing it. Sometimes you can get swept up in an exciting scene. And so there have been times where I realize, wow, I just read that scene like a fan. I need to go back a page or two and read it again
Interesting.
as the editor.
Almost like when you drive home and then you find yourself sitting in the driveway and you're like, I don't even remember the drive. How did I get here?
Yeah.
Oh, I must have done something. I'm home. So I did make it. I don't remember much of what happened. So yeah, you have to go back and rewind and experience it again.
Yeah.
For people who love Star Trek, talk a little bit more about how the stories just keep, and the universe keeps growing from a story perspective. Is there any limits to where, like you said, they have to kind of fit, they can't break anything, but is there like this outer limit to what we can do in the Star Trek world without changing the course of the show in the movies?
Well, I think Star Trek, well, any franchise that exists for as long as Star Trek has,
Yeah.
and there are few. I mean, there's like Doctor Who, for example, or the James Bond movies or whatever, and they all tend to reflect their own time. And so you do see any long-running franchise kind of adjusting to fit in better with the time it exists in. And so, the TV shows that are being made now are substantially different in tone often from if you go back and look at the original series, say. And the further the original series gets in the past, the more the current shows can start playing around with that continuity, with that canon a little bit, kind of, bending it, trying not to break it. But sometimes telling a good story just sort of demands that maybe you look the other way and whistle a little bit from something that existed, 50 years ago.
Right.
And in fact, that's a lot of what the writers of the prose fiction in the Star Trek novels and short stories, often a fun part of those is these little cracks that appear in the continuity just because you have so many different people making so many different things over 6 decades. It's fun to then try to look at a couple things that appear to contradict one another and find a way to fix it, find a way to do a retcon and make everything fit back together again.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that, hardcore fans love discussing and arguing about. Does this conflict with that? No, maybe it means this. And it's all, I think, part of the fun of being, if you're a raving Star Trek fan that has been watching it for all these years, it's fun. I mean, Star Trek fans, I think, are notoriously, nitpickers about all the little details.
I would love to have you on my team for any kind of trivial game, or I'd love to see on Jeopardy and the topic of Star Trek come up. I'd be like, oh, well, this will be fun.
No.
This will be fun.
You would not, because I'm a person who cracks under pressure.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
but just the sheer knowledge you have, my gosh.
I have, when I'm sitting and writing or editing, I can remember all these little fiddly details, but if there's a timer going on and I'm supposed to answer, then it all leaves my head.
There you go. Okay. Wow. It's amazing. So you're still a fan of the show. You're still a fan of the story. For you, is there a season, a generation, a time period of Star Trek that you prefer as far as the storytelling elements of it?
Well, I'm a person that I usually don't rank things. I don't say this is my best. This is, it's like, but certainly not every show or episode or movie can rank the same if you start trying to force yourself to make a list or something. I usually kind of cheat when I get asked this kind of question because I break it down into a couple things. There's like the nostalgia thing where, I grew up watching the original series when that's all there was. Right. And so that will always have a significant special place in my love of Star Trek. Yeah. But then, I also love how Deep Space Nine introduced more long-form storytelling where there were continuing arcs. Back in the 60s, that's not the way most TV shows were made. And even now, a lot of TV shows aren't really made to have any sort of long continuity.
Right.
When a new episode starts, it's almost as if the previous episode didn't happen.
Right.
And so, I really loved Deep Space Nine for that. And, I loved the movies when it brought the original cast onto, bigger adventures. I really enjoyed some of what JJ did with his Star Trek reboot. seeing, new actors playing them. I've been enjoying Strange New Worlds generally. I think there's some great actors on there. I think Ethan Peck is doing a great Spock. So what I tend to do, I guess, is I find the things that I love in every incarnation.
Okay. Yeah.
And so even if one show versus another show isn't my favorite, I find the things in something that I love. The actors, the characters, and that's what I focus on.
Okay. Yeah. And a reminder before I ask this question that I'm not an author, so I don't understand the ins and outs of everything. So I'm pleading my ignorance here up front. The difference between what you write and what I would term a fan fiction, what is the difference between what you're doing and what a fan fiction would be? Because I don't understand the difference in this moment.
Well, really, it's just that, fan fiction is, you're just giving it away.
Okay.
It's not, authorized
Right.
by whoever owns the IP. And in the case of Star Trek, Simon and Schuster, since 1979, has held the license from CBS Paramount to publish Star Trek fiction. And so if you get published by them, that is authorized fiction.
Right.
If you're not getting published by them and you're just writing your own stories and, posting them on a website or something, that's fan fiction. As far as the storytelling or the quality of the writing, you can find lots of fan fiction online for just about any IP, and you're going to see stuff that covers the gamut of writing quality. You're going to see stuff that's written by people who are just starting out and they're not very polished or whatever, but you're going to find stories written by people that, even if they haven't been traditionally published, they've really worked at their craft, and you're going to find stuff that's just as good as anything that's being published. And in the case of the Strange New Worlds short story anthologies, the contest anthologies that were done by Simon and Schuster back in the day, a lot of the people that got published in those had previously been fan fiction writers. They hadn't pursued trying to get traditionally published because there wasn't really a route to publish Star Trek short fiction. And then when Simon & Schuster came up with the idea for these Strange New Worlds short story contests, suddenly there was a way for fan fiction writers to submit stories. And if they were lucky, they'd end up in one of those anthologies, and then they were a professionally published Star Trek author.
That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. That helps. Because I'm curious, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I've never pretended to be one. I don't even know any lawyers technically. But if I go out and decide I'm going to write a fan fiction book based on Star Trek, and I'm using Star Trek terminology, characters, the word Star Trek in my book, and I'm just doing it on my own as a fan fiction, a nod to a franchise I love, and I just want to share my own story about it and make up my own universe. Not really a great idea to be using copywritten material in that way. Is that kind of a caution, maybe?
Star Trek, and in a lot of IPs, Doctor Who, Star Wars,
right? Yeah,
they will tend to kind of look the other way as long as you are not charging for it.
Oh, I see. There it is. Okay, that makes sense.
But if you start trying to make money off it,
right,
then you could get that cease and desist letter from the lawyers at Paramount.
You can be inspired by a movie franchise or something else, but the moment you try to write as if you are the creator of that franchise, that's where things get really, really dicey.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, especially if you start trying to sell it.
Yeah.
If you're just putting it up on your website or on I can't remember the names of various things, but there are various websites that specialize in fan fiction. So you can go onto one of these websites and you can just look for your whatever your favorite show is, Twilight, Star Trek, Doctor Who, My Little Pony, whatever. You can find fan fiction
Right.
that's written by and for fans that just gets distributed online.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's a great way for people to learn how to write
Yeah.
and just have fun with some franchise that for whatever reason is near and dear to them. We all love, if there's something you love like Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever, you kind of want to feel a part of it.
Yeah.
And that's why people cosplay and everything. You enter that world.
Yeah.
And expressing yourself through fan fiction is one of the ways that people can show their love for a franchise. And so most franchises and creators, think it's pretty cool that there are these people out there that love their stuff so much that they want to write within that universe.
Right.
And as long as they don't, cross certain lines, like charging for it, then it's great. It's all in fun.
So how do you keep yourself connected with the community as someone in your role? You are dealing with writers, you're dealing with, the publisher. I'm sure you have some kind of interaction with the characters in the show itself. Like you've got to have there has to be some kind of bridge here with all the things that you're touching. How do you keep yourself active? Are you going to Comic-Cons and things like that and just as a participant, or just going in and being part of the world? What do you do?
I go to conventions now and then.
Okay.
I can't really afford to go to a lot.
Yeah.
There's one in particular called Shore Leave that's out on the East Coast, and that's a fan-run convention, and I've been going there for about 20 years now. The great thing about Shore Leave is they do give a lot of attention to the writers. Most conventions, understandably, the main guests are the actors that are in the shows and movies that we love.
Right.
And Shore Leave definitely gets the actors as well. Yeah. But then they also have this other track of panels and stuff that is dedicated to writers. Primarily, a lot of Star Trek, but other writers as well. And so that con is a lot of fun. That's how I started meeting the editors and other writers that work in on the printed fiction, because I got to go there when I first got published in the Strange New Worlds contest. That's going way back to like 2006, I think, was the first time I went to Shore Leave, and and then got to meet people who had already published Star Trek novels. Got to meet the editor at that time, Marco Palmieri, and that's the main one. There's a couple other conventions I go to now and then, but I kind of save my travel budget to make sure I get out to Shore Leave every year.
Good.
Every year that I can.
Good. What time of year is Shore Leave?
It's in July.
July.
In the first half of July. It kind of, wanders around in the first couple of weeks of July.
Okay. All right. Then I guess the other question too would be just around how does an author writing for what you're going to be editing, how does it go from a writer through the publisher to you for copy editing and for your perusal and your sign off? Like, what is the process for a writer how do these things get to you?
Well, when you're dealing with an IP like Star Trek, there's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Right.
And so the publisher doesn't take unsolicited manuscripts. It's going to be a connection made via an agent.
Okay.
And, either the author trying to get in touch with the editors at Simon & Schuster, or the editors at Simon & Schuster might think, oh, wouldn't it be great if, so-and-so wrote a Star Trek novel? And so the editors might reach out to someone. Okay. And that's the only way to end up publishing with Star Trek.
Okay. All right.
Which, I have to, in my position, as I've been working on the novels, first as a copy editor and now as the developmental editor, I often have to deliver the sad news to up and coming writers that will get in touch with me and say, "Oh, could you help me get my Star Trek novel published? I've been working on the Star Trek novel." And I have to say, I'm sorry, but you have to be at a higher level and sort of an established writer.
Yeah.
That's just the way the business works these days. And so you have to jump through those hoops, and then it has to be given like the stamp of approval in a couple of layers, a couple of stages, because there's a pitch for the novel, and then there's an outline for the novel, and then there's the manuscript, and at each stage it goes through the editor at Simon and Schuster, and then it also goes to people at CBS Paramount, or in the case of the new shows, to Secret Hideout. That's the production company that's making the current Star Trek series, because it has to get approved by them as well to make sure that everything is the way they want it. That's how they protect their baby.
Right.
That's the Star Trek franchise, by making sure that all these ancillary products that get, whether it's a novel or a toy or whatever, it all has to be approved by the people who hold the license.
Wow.
And that's CBS Paramount.
Okay. That's really interesting. So when something lands on your desk or in an email to you, a story comes to you, it's already gone through many, many different levels to get to you even, right?
Yeah, before it gets, back when I was the copy editor, it had already gotten all the approvals before it ended up with me.
Yeah.
Now that I'm the developmental editor, I'm actually working with the authors, potentially right from the beginning, where they just have a pitch. And so they'll send me the pitch, I'll read the pitch, I might say, "This is perfect, let's send it off for approval."
Okay.
Or I might say, "Oh, wait a minute, this little bit, what if it was this? What if, I'll chip in my 2 cents, kind of work with the author through the pitch, through the outline, through the novel." And so it goes through me, and I'm just pitching in ideas that I think will help the book in the approval process. It's the author's story, but I do what I can beforehand to see if I can make sure that we're going to just, zoom through that approval process and keep the project moving.
So, okay, with all of the sign-offs, this is really fascinating conversation. I love this. I've never been able to have someone like you on my screen to get this kind of information. I love it. For all of these story ideas coming in through this process into the world of all things Star Trek, would this be kind of like an on-ramp for story writers? Would they ever look at all of these stories coming in from all these other outside sources going, "There's some ideas here for potential projects we could work on in the future"? Like, does this become like kind of like in baseball, be like the minor leagues of stories that could eventually a story could move up and even go further than where it's been as a printed novel?
Generally, that's not how it works.
Okay.
If you're talking about the novels and then talking about the filmed versions, they usually run on very separate tracks.
Okay.
And there are, every once in a while there might be a little bit of cross-pollination that goes from books to TV shows. But mostly it's only the other way, because the TV shows can kind of do whatever they want, but the fiction has to make sure that it doesn't contradict anything in the movies or the TV shows. The writers of the novels have to be much more aware of what's going on the screen, whereas the screenwriters don't have to be aware of what's going on in the novels.
Okay, well then you could get caught in the middle too, right? Because somebody submits an idea for a writing, they change something in the actual storylines in the future, and you're caught in the limbo between an idea from a writer and what's happening in real time, as a production, and now the production's changed something that the writer's written. Now the writer's story is no longer relevant, right? And you're in the middle of this?
Most of the time, it doesn't happen during the process of writing a novel.
Okay.
Because, like, say, when the pitch goes in for approval,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure if this is it. It probably has happened. I don't have a specific example, and I might not be able to share it if I did. But if a pitch goes in to Paramount for approval, and they've got something in the works that's close to that, then they might not give the approval.
Yeah,
They'll just
that
say,
makes sense.
no, this is this is treading on something that we're dealing with. You can't do this.
Yeah.
And so usually, the author writes their novel, gets published, everything's great. But then the heartache can come for the author when then, 6 months after the novel is published, one of the TV shows does something and it throws the novel out of continuity.
Right.
And sometimes that can be a bummer. It's just like, I put all this into it and now it's out of continuity. But on the other hand, the novel still stays there. It stays in print. It's just it becomes sort of like an alternate timeline thing, because it's like, well, here's a book that no longer fits. And of course, now when there's all these new shows being made, that has rendered so many of the books out of continuity, going back years and years and years. And, or even when Next Generation first came on,
Right.
That started doing things that made books that had been written out of continuity. Happens all the time.
Okay. This is fascinating. How many writers are you working with at any given time? Like how many? Because like for me, I would be struggling to keep the story straight. Author A, author B, author D, all these people sending me these stories, and I'd be like, wait, did they say this or did they say this? And I'd be trying to, in my mind, trying to bounce back and forth if I'm reading multiples at one time. How many people are you working with at any given time?
Well, let's see. Well, right now I have 3 novels that are in various stages.
Okay.
One is in layout at some point and is probably going to be going just to the proofreader soon. Then I've got another one where the author, then the other 2 are both of them, the author is in the process of writing the novel.
Okay.
And so, and then, there's all these various stages. So it might be that I've got one novel where I'm working with the author on the outline, and another one where I'm already reading the manuscript, and another one that is going into layout. And so they're never like all the same thing at the same time. They're, spread out. And so it's not like I'm reading one person's novel and having to read the other person's novel at the same time. That's generally not going to happen. So that helps you keep it all straight. But yeah, it does get a little bit more complicated now that I'm the developmental editor, because I'm working on all these various stages instead of just getting a completed manuscript to copy edit.
And when do you have time to just write for yourself? Like, how do you have time for that? I don't even understand how you do all this.
That is the main challenge of my career at this point, is because I make sort of a living off my freelance editing. And so that includes the work I do for Simon & Schuster on the Star Trek novels. I copy edit novels for Baen Books. They publish a lot of military sci-fi and other genre stuff. I do the proofreading on the IDW Star Trek comic book line. And then I also do a lot of editing directly for authors who are planning to self-publish. And so that's basically my day job. And then I try to have time for my own writing. I generally try to take on a workload of the freelance editing, that I can comfortably do in like a regular 8-hour day, Monday through Thursday, and then have Friday to work on my own stuff. And, or sometimes even hoping that, maybe I can finish my editing work by, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then get in a couple of hours of writing. And because I kind of try to maintain sort of a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job, particularly for the editing work.
Yeah.
But then, oftentimes on the weekends, depending on the amount of, life intrudes, you have chores, you have family, you have, stuff that needs to be taken care of. But then I try to grab a couple hours at least of a Saturday and Sunday morning out in my office so I can write my own stuff. No matter how carefully I try to control my schedule, things can get out of hand. Publishing is a very deadline-driven business, and sometimes, things happen. You get, a frantic email from an editor where, something has gone wrong on their end, and I get a call from Bain Books or whatever, and they're like, could you take this, rush job on this manuscript? We need it back in a week, or, whatever it is.
Wow.
And lots of times, it's like, well, I got to make a living. So then I'll take a job, or sometimes a job comes by that's just so cool. It's like, I have got to work on this.
Right.
And so then maybe my own writing, will end up very much pushed to the back burner for a couple of weeks while I work on something. And so that can get really frustrating because I definitely haven't been getting enough writing done lately. But I do love my editing stuff too. So, I really enjoy working with writers and helping them polish up their manuscript. But yeah, I wish that I could find a better balance. I wish I could afford to just like work half time on other author stuff and half on my stuff.
Yeah.
But it's, that doesn't quite make enough money. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, okay. So Scott, I'm going to wrap up with a question here to kind of, again, I get to talk to you all day. It's fascinating. I love all this. Because I was the kid back in school with the Star Trek lunch kit, the thermos and the box and everything, right? And I mentioned I had Adam Nimoy on the show. It was Spock. That was my set. And I remember that back in the 70s. So that was my thing, and I loved it. So, and I've had some other people on the show that have ties to Star Trek, which is outstanding. So I think this is going to eventually turn into a Star Trek podcast, possibly, just with great guests like you. But before we go to my last question, wrapping up, I'm on your website. I love it. There's a lot of information here. Talk about your website for a new visitor, and maybe for you as an author, where's the starting point for a reader when they purchase your books? Where would you like to send them as here's a good place to start?
Yeah, well, if you go to my website, that's scott-pearson.com, you can find just about everything that I'm up to. I love posting the covers of things that I'm working on, both my own writing and stuff that I'm editing or proofreading. And so you can see all kinds of books that I've worked on. I've been an editor, a professional editor for 20 years, roughly 25 years. And so I have worked on hundreds of books, over 300 books, of a wide variety of stuff. I used to have a day job in-house as an editor at a nonfiction imprint, worked on a lot of military history. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been, focusing on fiction, primarily science fiction. And so you can see all the kinds of stuff that I've worked on. But then you can also find the stuff that I've been published in, both the stuff that's been traditionally published, and I have a separate page on my website that showcases the stuff that I'm self-publishing. I would really love for people to check out those self-published books because I'm having a lot of fun with those. My most recent book I mentioned at the top of the show, The Sad Rains of Mars, is a collection of a dozen short stories. But I'm also doing a series called The Tales of the Weird World War that I'm writing with a friend of mine, Bill Leisner, whom I met through Star Trek because he also was a winner in the Strange New Worlds Star Trek writing contest. So I've known him for a couple decades now. And we're doing this series, Tales of the Weird World War, that's about shape-shifting monsters that are sort of infiltrating society, and no one knows where they're coming from or what they're really up to. And we do a book sort of decade by decade. The first book, the first volume was set in the 40s. The second volume is set in the 50s. We're currently at work at the next volume that's set in the 60s. And as you go through the series, the sort of alternate timeline angle is going to get more, and it's going to diverge more and more from established history. And what we do is we each write a novella for each volume. So we don't co-write a single story together. We each write individually a novella, and sometimes they're sort of completely unrelated, except for the fact that they're set in the same world. But then there are times where, characters might appear in one of his stories. They might show up later in one of my stories. And so we're having a lot of fun with that. And those are the books that I really hope people check out. They can see the sort of the wide variety of genres that I like to play with. Yeah. That first volume in the Tales of the Weird World War series, my story is a noir detective story. It's narrated in first person by a private detective. I picture Humphrey Bogart or someone as this character. Yeah. So it's this science fiction horror monster thing, but it's very much follows all the tropes of classic noir detective stuff. And then the next volume that's set in the 50s, plays a little bit more off the 1950s and what people were thinking of then, flying saucers. And so we're having a lot of fun mashing up genres.
Wow.
And that's what readers will find if they read my short story collection as well, that I love to mix sci-fi in with horror or mystery or comedy and, see where it takes me.
I don't know how you have any spare time to do anything other than what you're doing right now. You need a few more extra days in the week. Okay, let's go back to a fan moment then. If one of the characters from Star Trek, past, present, could step out off the screen for you and just walk in and sit down with you in your room there with all those books behind you, and just you have time with them, a true fan moment, which character, if they stayed in character, not the person that's, the character themselves came into the room
character
and sat down with you, okay, who would you love to spend time with? Just love. Like you just, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here. Well, you only get to pick one. I know it's a big world, but you get to pick one. Who would it be?
I kind of think I'd have the most fun talking with Data.
Yes.
And I almost said Spock because since I'm an old school Star Trek fan, I think Spock was my favorite character back in the day. And of course, Data is, very much a Spock analog. But I think it would be so much fun to have a sentient android friend.
Interesting, because I think Data kind of has some little AI-ish to him. If you look in the current world of AI, there's a little bit of AI in Data, right? I think, maybe.
Except he actually is intelligent.
Good point.
As opposed to the, these programs that churn out stuff now that we call artificial intelligence. It's certainly artificial, but they're not very intelligent.
No, yeah, I think Data's got them beat. That's an interesting character. Yeah, I was trying to, in my mind, predict who you would pick. I thought maybe Spock, but yeah, Data's a good choice. I like that. Awesome. Scott, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for taking time out of all of your editing and reading and Star Trek world to come down to our planet and spend some time with us. It's great to have some shore leave with you. So thank you so much for being with us on the show. I love it.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone go and check Scott's website out. If you get to see Scott at the event at Shore Leave, make sure you identify yourself. Come up and make sure Scott knows that you heard about him on the podcast and that you're a fan of what he's writing and what he's editing. I'm sure he'd love to meet you as well at that event. But yeah, Scott, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5 kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.